Now I know it may seem that on this channel we tend to look down on consoles, but we've all used one at one time or another, because PCs used to be very expensive and you weren't likely to be bought one for your birthday. But that's where the console came in, and this is the top 7 greatest video game consoles ever made. Consoles that defined and redefined what we understand when we utter the words gaming console. Those devices that we use to play so many great games, a few great games at least, some of them, until we eventually graduated to something more. At least some people, that others are still around playing with their PlayStation 4s and Xbox Ones, believing that the human eye can't see more than 30 frames a second or more than 5 hours. That's a The Order 1886 joke, by the way, apart from the game itself being a joke, I mean. That being said, let's get it started with number 7, no Pogodi. You may be wondering to yourself, what the hell is this? Are you joking? Is this some Game & Watch ripoff made in Russia? Are you mocking us? And to that I'll answer, comrade, you should visit party before party visits you. But no, this was a creation back in the day. Around here, that was most people's introduction to mobile gaming. Sure, it was a simple concept. You had just one game on this thing because it was painted on, and you would you would activate one of the frames of the picture depending on what buttons you pressed, but there was a logic in there. There was a game in there. A simple game where you caught eggs in the role of that wolf from that show from a goddamn long time ago, Behind the Iron Curtain. The rabbit showed up too, but he just laughed at you. Unlike the Games & Watch, which was made by Nintendo, this only had one screen, but it did also act as a watch. And there were a lot of versions of it. Not just with No Pogodi, I do believe there was one with Pif Hercule, you know, the French cartoon with the dog and the cat. Now, you may again be asking, why are you putting this in a list of best consoles ever made? Because it was. Behind the Iron Curtain, it was. If you came around here with a Game Boy, my god, you must have had parents that were high-ranking party officials. You must have sent half your neighbors to the gulag. Speaking of which, number 6, Brick Game. Now I know the Game Boy sold 100 million units. It's insanely popular. Brick Game probably sold 1 billion, and it's still selling them. Brick Game is what you get when you make a system specifically to play Tetris and then you realize, oh my god, people may actually get bored of this. Let me put 9,999 other variations of Tetris that have different shapes, that have different speeds, different attributes. Let's make a racing game out of Tetris blocks, at least. Sure, it was a horrible racing game, much like all the racing games on the Atari, but it worked. And the core game, Tetris, was addictive as hell. I'm not joking when I say that people at families would fight over this brick game. Within a year, all the buttons would be worn out, everybody and their dog was playing it, and the darn things are still on sale. Yes, even now. Sure, you have no reason to buy them because you can just play Tetris on your smartphone, though there is something about the tactile feel of this thing that just feels better than a phone. Also, you can hit people with it. Number 5, the brown box. All of console gaming owes its existence to one thing: Nolan Bushnell ripping off Ralph Baer. Because without Ralph Baer, we would not have consoles in general. He made the concept, he created it. Over the course of several years, alongside Bill Harrison and Bill Rush, he created several prototypes for a video games console, and the final one was this, the brown box. Sure, by today's standards, it's not a very sophisticated gaming console, only having very primitive games, usually involving shapes that you can move around and a lot of imagination, but it was the basis of the video game console. And sadly, it took quite some time for the idea to get some traction in the, well, there was the gaming industry then, but in the public's eye. It was only only in 1971 that Magnavox agreed to manufacture the brown box as a product and sell it to everybody that wanted a game console. And it was sold under the name Magnavox Odyssey, which still didn't have what you would call... No, wait, no. It still had games that were more game than the rest. Sure, they were simple, but hey, it was the year 1971. You could not really do much back then. Speaking of rip-offs, number 4, the Atari 2600. The quintessential gaming console, the console that everybody would say is the one that started it all. It's not. It was the brown box and the Magnavox Odyssey, but this one is the general de facto gaming console of the olden days. Built upon the success of Pong, which again was kind of stolen from Ralph Baron Tennis for 2 before him, the Atari 2600 was a gigantic success for its time. It sold 30 million units, and it was cloned so many times that we even had versions of it behind the Iron Curtain, with games programmed into it with no cartridges and with the same mostly horrible games. River Raid was good. 2 or 3 other ones also good. Most of them were horrible. The majority of them were goddamn horrible. They were atrocious. People say, well, the video game crash of whatchamacallit here was because of FET. No, it was because most games on the Atari 2600 were horrible. There was no quality control. There was just no one even asking, hey, should we let people publish just about every piece of crap? And the answer was yes. And they did. And that's how console gaming almost died. But still, up until console gaming almost died, at least in the US, to be clear, this is a US thing, gaming never died anywhere else in the world. It's the American consumerism that went insane and capitalism that ran amok, disregarding all sense of quality, that led to that crash. Remember that. And yet, up until that crash, this thing pumped the video games industry into the mainstream and set the groundwork for Nintendo and Sega to just take everything over later on. Number 3. The Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. Yes, I put both of them in this position because they're both kind of great consoles. Yes, the NES brought back console gaming in the USA, though I'm not sure that that's necessarily a good thing. I mean, without console gaming, you would have appreciated the Ultima series more and, you know, PC games in general. Commander Keen, yeah. But it was the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis that just pushed console gaming to its finest back in the day. I mean, you had here 2 still relatively limited platforms, but they gave us games which are even today considered classics, considered flawless achievements of gaming, like the original Sonic game, or Super Metroid, Chrono Trigger if you're a fan of grinding, and many other titles that are just evocative of some of the best that console games have to offer. Also, a lot of things with Super in the title. A lot of things. Number 2. The PlayStation 2. There can be no doubt that the PlayStation 2 is one of the greatest things ever made. It was not just the best-selling video games console ever sold. I mean, a standalone one. In the mobile department, the brick game just blows everything out of the water. It was also the best-selling DVD player. Yes, the best-selling single version of a DVD player is the PlayStation 2. Sure, it wasn't necessarily the most revolutionary. I mean, the Dreamcast had online before it and some neat other features, but this one had style, had power, and it had the games. It had games for pretty much 10 years constantly. Great games. Fantastic games. Some of the best games ever created. Some of the best-selling games ever created. They were all on PlayStation 2. They existed in part because of the PlayStation 2. It was a superb machine. It defined a decade of gaming. It defined the industry. And it sent Microsoft and into a paranoid spiral that ended up with them ruining PC gaming, but that's a matter for another day. And the number one greatest console ever made is the Terminator. Now before you say, wait a minute, isn't this an NES? Are you laughing at us again? This is just an NES, isn't it? To which I'll say, welcome to Gulag, comrade. Because if you had an NES back when the NES was launched, oh boy, you were either a spy, like a legit spy, or again, you sent people to the gulags where your family did constantly, and therefore were rewarded with the ability to buy foreign, non-communist merchandise. Harashov. Instead of the NES, we had the Terminator. We had it about 10 years later than the NES, but we had it. 8-bit gaming in the 90s. It was amazing. And it was even more amazing because this thing had games which the NES could never dream of running. The thing in the background, yeah, that's Street Fighter 2 running in 8 bits on the Terminator. It was kinda horrible but playable, and hey, we didn't have anything else, so it was great. And it was cheap. Oh my god, was it cheap. Mostly because every game for it was pirated. Like, you could not buy legit games for it. Sure, it was probably compatible with the cartridges of the NES, but good luck finding them. Also because the cartridges were rip-offs, sometimes 99 games shoved into one with plenty of false advertising. They didn't go for the more higher price cartridges that, you know, required a battery for saved games, so no Zelda, no Metroid, no Final Fantasy, just the stuff that you could play in one sitting, like Urban Champion, Shigeru Miyamoto's magnum opus, the greatest game ever made. My god, did that thing suck. And I had it with my Terminator. I had a red one. It's gone now. Should have kept it, it was kind of unique. Though the gamepads blew up in about 2 months. Well, that would be it for the greatest gaming consoles ever conceived. If you have a different opinion than mine, please say so in the comments. But somehow I know you've already done that. You've done that even before you reached this point in the video, haven't you? Yes, you have. Yes, you have. Also, fun fact, the Terminator could run at 60 frames a second. Funny, ain't it?